is she emailing? Are you emailing the slides?
I can email it or it's gonna just show it just like that because it's on your screen. Did you log in? Log in with the code. One, two, two, seven, four, oh. Because you know it has a play out, you know, like, you tell me what you want me to do. Okay, so here is it. Okay, so this is it. I can push to look at me. I'm talking to the IT guy. I can press present or I can press share to email it to you.
If you can present from right here,
Will it show on the online?
the online is only going to see what is coming through the camera.
Then that'll work.
That'll work.
So I'm going to present.
Here is the audience. The online audience will only hear what is said into the microphone. So that's for you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Brandy and I am the co-founder of the Carousel Foundation of Greater St. Louis, which is a 501c3 in the heart of St. Louis. We're on live stream. They'll be able to hear it online, so I guess they can hear us online. Again, so good afternoon. And I wanted to talk to you all about a couple of things, and I've got some notes because I definitely want to make sure that I'm not missing any data. But I want to tell you a little bit more about who I am and how I decided that it was more than just giving money to people jingling a can or donating back to school supplies at a drive, that Hartford community is being realistic and being accountable and holding all parties involved accountable. So as an occupation for 13 years of my adult life, I was a metallurgist, which is an alloy chemist. And there was this talk about this epidemic that was coming along, and we now call it COVID-19. And it was a decision made from the company that I thought I was going to retire from that they would shutter because a combination of Chinese tariffs and the supplies and things that they needed to get along with this pandemic that we don't know at this point. They're saying we can get it from our dogs, we can get it from a rug, we don't know enough about it, and that they were going to shutter. So what they did was they offered me a severance. Okay, so they offered me a severance package. Okay, and then they offered me an additional nice little chunk of change to cap off the facility and mandate what happens when OSHA comes in and other regulatory bodies. And of course, I was the only one that lived here in the state of Missouri, and others lived in North Carolina, and so I was obliged. I'm like, this is easy. Okay, yeah. So babysit people closing something down that's already closing down. Okay, great. Well, the thing was, what do I do next? Okay, so I felt like that at that particular time, I had bet on everybody else, and so I would bet on myself. Okay, so I decided that I would take all of my 401k, all of my severance, the additional money that they gave me, all of it. Well, it was probably about 15%, not even 15% of it left. Just stick with me, okay? Hang in there. Yeah, I know not all of it, because, I thought, I'm young. We'll get it back, right? Okay? So I decided to open up a restaurant in St. Louis County, and it was called Funnel Cake Factory St. Louis. The restaurant, it was a time where now everybody's afraid, and they are locked into their homes, and nobody's going anywhere. And so it was kind of that situation where they made the restaurants become, they were like priority, you know what I mean? That you can have a restaurant open, because everything was shut down, and then they were like, okay, anybody that sells food, you can be open, And people would think to themselves, if I could just taste summer, if I could just taste the fair, if I could just taste going to a park, because we're doing none of this at this time because we don't know what's going on and what's happening with this pandemic. They were like, if I could just taste that. And at this point, the facility was probably at the end, I probably had maybe about 3 more visits. And so I poured into this restaurant, okay? And then I was notified that the whole world would be shutting down 3 months later. So, meanwhile, I've spent all of my 401k, majority of the severance, and the little extra money that I was so happy to receive. However, probably about 4 months later, and I'm just guesstimating now because we're like 6 years for me behind that, I decided that I would, try to push forward. There were some lifts, and they determined restaurants were essential, and at least other businesses that I wanted to be like, I said that I would open up my doors because I wanted to be like them. I was now like them and more, you know what I mean? Because they were already like, we're not going to be able to survive this pandemic. Well, after a year of that, there were so many different fundings that were received by like landlords, lessors, commercial property owners, and the owner of my building that I was in, the one that I spent all the 401k, had decided that, welcome. They had decided that they got a couple of concessions and stipends and that they no longer wanted the building anymore. And I thought too, no. But then I thought to myself, I said, well, what's next? And I thought about where I was, what I had experienced in that short time, and I decided that I want to revitalize downtown St. Louis. So let's go downtown. So I go down to downtown St. Louis to move my restaurant and not be a victim. And then we get more knowledge about this pandemic. It doesn't just go away, okay? So now this time, everybody is shutting down, and only those who survive are surviving. But on top of that, my restaurant became a hub for the city's unhoused. So it wasn't just where I could pass $1 out the window, you know what I mean? Pile up a bunch of clothes and put it in a doorway until somebody come pick it up or whatever, because I've always been a giver, so I didn't feel anything about that. So I just was like, well, what is this? So after a while, I got to see some familiar faces. And at this time, the money is low, but something was telling me in my heart that, feed the people, Besides, we don't know, the world's about to come to the end, right? At this point, there's death tolls and things like that. So it's just kind of like, let's make community be community. Well, in that, long story short, which I can never do, I end up having a lot of conversations with those individuals, okay? And I realized very quickly that a lot of them had a sense of agency for themselves, but they didn't really know how to put it together. Now, if you know anything about the unhoused community, a lot of people think it's just that. Somebody jingling a can, somebody begging for money, somebody who lives on the street. But you can be on someone's couch and you are unhoused. That is not your home, okay? And don't get a piece of mail or think you can get a piece of mail at their house. Then they really like, okay, well, hold on, how long you staying? Because now you're getting mail, okay? So those are all instances of unhoused or people in transition, as well as those women and children who are part of domestic violence situations. Just because you're at your aunt's or your girlfriend's, you're still unhoused. That is not your home, okay? So what I'm trying to do is change the minds of people and their mindset when it comes to people who are going through transitions, what disparity is, and unhoused. Well, to tie this all in, one of the gentlemen that would come help me every morning, and I always give him money to help. He would sweep, he would take out the trash, and he was more or less unhoused. We'll just call him Liam, okay? So I said, well, Liam, you do all of these things for me in my restaurant, and, you're pretty good at it, and, you're always timely. And I said, well, if you will work for me, why don't you just get a job, That'll help your situation. And he said, well, I can't. And I said, well, why not? Let's get candid. Is it something that, you want to share? Maybe I can help. I know some good people, He said, no. He said, well, I don't have a house. And I was like, well, if you get a job, this is in ignorance, and get a house, right? Or somewhere to live, or give somebody something and, make it yours, or co-op. And he said, no, Miss Brandy, he said, I don't have a house. I don't have an address. And I said, okay, well, but your body works. And he said, well, I don't have an ID. And so I said, why you have an ID, Liam? He said, because I don't have an address. Right. And so it became like the song that never ends, like the Lamb Chop song. And so I had to stop and I said, well, what do we do to make this situation better? And he was like, well, I need an address. I need an address so I can get an ID. I need an ID so I can work to get an address, okay? And so we're going on and on and on about it. And then I had to think about when I go to the DMV, they ask you everything shy of your firstborn, like Rumpelstiltskin. It's like you need 2 pieces of ID, your blood type. And you have to think about it. If somebody is in transition, they're under a breezeway one day, under a bridge another day. And so more or less, they probably don't have these things in tow with them to make pertinent decisions to advocate for themselves, okay? So then all of a sudden, time goes on, they can't adapt to what is happening because they're getting further and further behind. What we don't realize is that stability, okay, advocacy and stability can put into place a lot of things for individuals. And so I told you a story about the unhoused, but now with the recent tornado, their population is even more. So now I have more unhoused friends, okay? Now, what is the difference between those unhoused and in Liam? Okay? And then moving forward to get out of transition and back on track, what does that look like? Okay? Now I want you to visualize before Liam became unhoused, before there was a tornado, what was happening? Was it perfect? No. Was it rainbows? No. Was everybody housed? No. Did everybody have a job? Did everybody even have an ID? No. Did everybody have food? No. Was everybody being well educated? No. Did everybody have a car? No. So I'm saying that to say the tornado didn't create some of these situations. Okay? There were other situations that took place before Liam got in his situation. And those are the things that I want to talk about. I want to talk about the unforgotten. Okay? I want to talk about the forgotten and how the partnership is going to have to take place for us to make any steps to move and really say that we have a heart for community. So I'm going to reference a thing, and I'm going to go another slide. Go ahead and go 2 slides up for me. Okay, so there are challenges that are in our community, and we have to move about with regard to it with understanding, okay? So, but we have to have a totally bold and meaningful action. And I say that because today we're focusing on the pillars of housing, wealth, transportation, employment, and unemployment. But these are not just isolated issues, as we just talked before, but they're all deeply interconnected. And I believe that the foundational opportunity to equity in St. Louis is going to be to really kind of look at these particular things. Go ahead and do the next slide for me. Okay, so our agenda today is the urgency of now. Reviewing the systematic and systemic barriers and opportunities, the actionable strategies, and then our community voices and the evidence-based practices that can help us move forward. We like to spend a lot of time talking about the past. I was in the session earlier this morning, and we made a lot of references about the past. Yes, the past happened. Yes, those things happened. Yes, people's homes got taken from them. But what are we doing in action mode because we don't want to go back because that wasn't perfect either. Right. But what are we doing to move forward to make sure that everyone has an equitable life? This is everybody. It's not about silos. It's about equity for all. Like, I really believe that all of this is going to go hand in hand, and I want to tie that in. Okay, so St. Louis City is a city of resilience, and we all know that, but it's also of disparity. So we see in data, and I'm going to go over some data, in our neighborhoods, according to the 2022 Community Health Assessment, the life expectancy can vary by up to 18 years depending on your zip code. That's just not a statistic. That's a call to action. That doesn't even make any sense. For someone's life expectancy by 18 years, that's a whole person, that's a whole adult. It's affected by where they live. Okay? Now think about somebody who don't have anywhere to live. Okay? What does that mean? Okay? So in North St. Louis City and County, the mental health outcomes are significantly worse with limited access to care and high rates of trauma and violence. But then we also have transportation barriers, lack of internet access, and then this also further isolates these same communities. Go ahead, so go to the next slide. So far this afternoon, I've been mainly talking about, go ahead, you can change it again. Go ahead, please. I've been talking about housing disparities, okay? So in my personal opinion, and I hope that you all agree, that housing is a human right, okay? But yet in St. Louis, racial disparities in home ownership still persist. Today, I'm gonna talk about African Americans. So in black families, they are far less likely to own homes and live in federally subsidized housing, which is often concentrated in high poverty areas. But this also gives them limited access to other opportunities. It's not just housing. So now we don't have the best housing, but then we've got these other challenges, okay? One community member said to me, Brandy, we don't just need affordable housing. We need housing that doesn't isolate us from jobs, schools, and safety. That's the truth. Because housing must be connected to everything else. When you're stable, everything else flows. You're well rested. You don't mind getting up for a job. You know what I mean? Even if you did have to use public transportation, you're well rested. So you don't mind getting up and being, able-bodied and, and working. Okay? Housing neighborhoods with wealth equities. 23% of homes in St. Louis were vacant in 2020. We're talking about 23% out of 100%. That's what we're talking about, no other numbers, okay? Absolutely. Over 50% of black St. Louis households are renters. Yes, ma'am.
Is this for city only?
This is for the city. Mhm. The median home value, that's not the home value. The median home value is $86,100 lower for black residents. So we're talking about a community with housing values that are less than 80,000. That's absurd. Why? Okay? So we're just talking about housing. Right. Well, now we have trouble or we have concerns and cause to be concerned about our housing. Now let's talk about health. Because they say health is wealth. Okay? Well, if that is the case, there are several people, several families in the city of St. Louis that are impoverished just on health alone. Okay? So, health disparities. The health outcomes in St. Louis are shaped by where you live as well. Ding, 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 ding. The Department of Health's strategic plan emphasizes equity. So I don't want you to think that there's nothing that's put into place. So people, when they have those big meetings, their intentions are absolutely well, okay? But we're still seeing gaps in the access to the care, and that is especially in the areas of mental health services and environmental health protections, okay? Again, mental health is wealth, health is wealth. We are already indicating that these people don't have access to these things, okay? So a recent report found that 60% of one's health is again determined by their zip code, okay? So that means that our environment, our housing, our transportation, and employment are all what? They're connected, and there are also health interventions. If you're worried about how you're getting to work and you're worried about, things like that affects your health. So one of the most striking examples that I found was that a recent report found that 60% of one's health is determined by the zip code. But one of the worst examples or the best examples of environmental injustice as it regards to health would be in our own region, and that is the contamination of the Coldwater Creek, okay? Now, it is a tributary to North St. Louis, but this creek was polluted with radioactive waste from the Manhattan Project. And just recently, and I know some of you all, somebody saw a nod over here, a 2025 Harvard study confirmed that children who lived near the creek between the 1940s and 1960s had a 44% higher risk of cancer compared to those living further away from the creek. The waste was stored in uncovered drums and exposed to the elements. I mean, it's in the air, so now it's airborne. Nice. And it leached into the soil and water. These same people that were around from the 1940s to 1960s had children, they had children, they had children, they had children. It's now 2025. And this isn't just history, okay? It is a current health crisis right now, okay? Because after it leached into the soil, families who live nearby, many of whom played in the creek, because I don't know about you all, I mean, I'm telling my age now, but we played outside, we stayed outside, we drank from the water hose, it wasn't, it wasn't water bottles in Fiji and all of that. And they were unknowingly exposed to this ionizing radiation, okay? Again, this isn't history. This is a current equity crisis. So the contamination has led to long-term health consequences. And Congress, because it's now it's gotten attention, Congress has recently expanded the radiation exposure compensation because it's just that bad. There are cases that you all have no idea about. Families that are just been ravished with cancer because of one simple, or what they thought would be simple, isolated situation. And they've acted to support the affected residents, okay? So, not only must we recognize housing, we have to recognize health and environmental situations which within we live, because when we must recognize our environmental health, it is racial and economic justice, okay? Communities like those in North County near the Coldwater Creek not only deserve remediation, in my personal opinion, but accountability. Like, I want to hear somebody say, we messed up. Like, we did, nobody said that, yeah, they're just fixing it, compensating people, but nobody's talking about what is being put into preventative measures since then, what we've done, and I'm like, this happened again. Like, we might not even know that it's happening again. We don't even know, but they need investment and they need healing, because a lot of families were affected by this. So, outside of just that situation that I brought to your attention, your zip code affects other things. Let's look at some more health disparities. All right, premature death are 56%, it's like I borrowed somebody's lips today, higher in North St. Louis, okay? Infant mortality rate, 3 times higher among black infants. Why? We can go back. We can go back to housing, we can go back to health, we can go back to not being able to get access to health care. Let's move along. Gaps in chronic illness and life expectancy. Okay? Coldwater Creek radiation contamination, we just talked about that. 24% cancer incidence among nearby residents, and then 44% higher risk of developing cancer. So it's just going on and on and on. So we're breeding families that are already predestined to, at some point in their life, possibly have activated carcinogenic cells. I mean, regardless to whether they want to or not, because it's now we're looking at 2 and 3 generations of this. So it's not just about being predisposed. They were literally, it was almost like a science project, if you will, and whether intentionally or unintentionally, okay? So now, the next slide, please. If we talk about, we've talked about housing, we've talked about health, let's talk about transportation barriers, okay? In underserved areas, there is limited public transit access in many areas, okay? Long commute times, especially for low-income households, and then racial disparities in vehicle access and travel patterns. I don't know if you have family or friends that live in St. Louis City. Do not try to order a pizza. They will not be delivering it to your house. Oh, you gotta pick that up. We're not going over there because they don't feel safe, or they, or even some situations, the roads are so dilapidated that they feel like, well, I'm not taking that DoorDash because I don't want to tear my vehicle. And there's no advocacy because there's no complaints. Or how about this? I don't think that a lot of our citizens, and that comes toward education, on what they really have the power to do. When I was coming up in elementary school, civics was required, okay? They have since taken that out of grammar school education. But in civics, you learned laws, citizen roles, you learned about what your alderman or alderwoman's role was in your community, what the mayor does, who was adjacent to the mayor, and you were tested on that so that you can know exactly how to contribute to your community and be a contributing member in society. That's what it was all about. You learned all about it. You learned the Constitution. You couldn't graduate without knowing the Constitution. Now, mind you, that they no longer teach cursive writing in school either, and the Constitution is completely written in cursive. These kids can't write their name. They can't. Right? They can't sign their name, their signature. You know, everything's on an iPad now. You know, but the point of it all is that a lot of the issues with limited public transit access in many areas can actually be compounded with housing issues, health issues, but at the same time, there is also an opportunity to say, hey, we need this particular route to be reinstated. We've got X amount of people that take that route every day, and because they take that route every day, you know, it warrants another route or another bus. But a lot of times people have no idea that they can actually rally and vie for the needs that they have in their own communities. Why do you think that is? Is it you think it's just for pure ignorance? Do you think it's intentional ignorance? Say that again. And control why? Because if you don't know what you're able to do, you don't know the power that you have, or you don't know the rights that you have, how can you ask for anything? How can you advocate for yourself? Oh, they're not going to do that. They're not going to give that to me. I'm not allowed to have that. And it's an untruth. Next slide, please, for me. So when we talk about health, housing, transportation, now let's talk about employment barriers. So employment and economic justice it holds really dear to me, because I worked in corporate America. Okay, I'm also an entrepreneur. I'm the co-founder of the Carousel Foundation, so I am in the nonprofit sector. But what I do realize and know, and it's just me coming up, you know, within my formal education, is that a lot of discrimination and hiring biases persist in the labor market, but they really shouldn't be. And the reason why is because I have had multiple opportunities to advance in my roles, and I did not further my education outside of that building. I did like OJT, you know what I mean? But again, people don't have a sense of agency if they don't know what they can do or what they believe in. There's a lot of people who make very decent money and they have no formal education, okay? So we're losing diligence and working things. Like, I'll give you an example. My grandmother, and she's passed now, she worked at a hospital. It wasn't until her older years that she had to go and take some continuing medical education because she was a nurse, because they said she was a nurse. Just in 2000 alone, when I entered into the PA program at St. Louis University, it is totally different. The hours that are required are totally different than when I was there now. It's like a whole full-on program. So it goes to show you that there's a lot of opportunities, but if people don't know that there are opportunities and that they don't have to continue to do streamline, you know, occupations and ways of educating themselves, how would they know? No, school is not for everyone. And what I mean now, but education is for everyone. Four-year colleges may not be for everyone, but education is for everyone. And education is knowing your rights, knowing about your health, knowing about what's owed to you, knowing that there are rules and laws for everyone. And those are some things that we have gotten away as a community. And so when it's time to advocate for ourselves, people really don't know. Sometimes on social media, you will see people have a lot of dialogue and they go back and forth. Well, why doesn't the mayor do this? And why doesn't the mayor do that? Well, that's not even her job. Your alderman or alderwoman in your area has the funds to make those changes. A lot of what has happened in community as it regards to like workforce development and employment barriers has come because some of the advocation comes from people who are just as ignorant. They don't know. We have elected officials for popularity contests and not really for their knowledge. There's actually a budget for all the people in place just so that they could be more astute and understand, what they do and what their role is. So it doesn't have to be just a popularity contest. It has to be accountability where people say, you know what? The people have elected me, but I'm not sure I know what I'm doing. There are so many budgets that go unaddressed, go unused, go misappropriated, all because of ignorance and or people don't want to say, I don't know. It's just better to be oblivious. With employment barriers, they say that 7.9% employment rate for black residents, we're talking about St. Louis City still, 1.5 times higher than white residents, okay? Said nothing about education, nothing about it. 38% earning below a living wage. Now, because of the pandemic, there were a lot of initial raises and there were a lot of increases to the earning and living wage. However, there are still required postings of what the standard is for minimum wage. I can tell you right now, you can walk into any of these restaurants and a lot of chains and things like that, and those posters are supposed to be posted. They're not. But they're not to keep people ignorant about the bare minimum that they're supposed to receive. There are people who are receiving below minimum wage for their pay just because they don't know. Earnings are 10K less or on average than white workers, and discrimination and hiring bias continue to persist in labor market, and I said that. Employment is a pathway to stability. We talked about housing, we talked about health, we talked about transportation, but see, not all jobs are created equal either. So we need inclusive hiring, workforce development, and support for entrepreneurship in underserved areas. Again, one local organizer said, Brandy, we don't want charity. We want investment. We want to build wealth and not just survive. And that's the mindset that we need to embrace. Telling my age again. When I grew up, there was a gentleman, and we called him the barbershop man. I'm sure his name was Mr. Something. I would not know it because we called him the barbershop man. And why? He had a barbershop in our community, okay? There was a German individual. I remember him, and his name was Boris, and I knew he was German because he would talk about it all the time. My mom would my grandmother would have me take my shoes there to get my taps replaced, and we could walk there. And I would be like, don't replace them, like I want a new pair of shoes. And he'll be like, look at this. Look what you've done to these shoes. And lo and behold, I'll come back, it's a new sole on them and more taps, and I wanted new shoes. There was a baker that we walked to, and we got donuts every morning. There was a cleaners there, and it was owned by a Jewish family. There was also many restaurants that we could walk to all the time, mom and pop restaurants. I say all of that to say that you can't find any of that in communities anymore. It was a sense of community because if something was wrong, we even have pharmacies. Now, of course, we still have our Walgreens, we still have our CVS, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. But there was a more sense of community, like where people were having conversations to say, oh, okay, well, what's going on with you? Well, I'm no doctor, but I remember those symptoms, well, you may want to go to the doctor, but if not, they've got this emollient at the pharmacy, you know, and go see Jude and ask him, you know, whatever, that kind of thing. It was, you know, bakers, you know what I mean? You got your birthday cakes not made at Walmart. You got them made right there in your community. What happened to all of those businesses? Did they lose their skill set? Did you don't think the family passed down how to do those things? You don't think that, you know, and we're talking about a German American, you don't think Boris's kids know how to put a tab on a shoe? That's probably the first thing that they learned. I'm saying all that to say, what happened? Say that again. Okay, so that means that there was some good stuff going on in the community. So good to the fact that people decided that we need to move on in there with the community, you know. So now we've got like our Foot Lockers and our Family Dollars, and we got all of these things. But we literally had grocers, you know. I could go to a market at the end of my street, get fruit. And I'm not talking about Soulard Market. I'm talking about like literally on the corner. In any borough in St. Louis, you could have a market at the end of your street to get fresh fruit, fresh meat. You didn't even, it was a butcher there. And even if there wasn't, there was always a deli inside of a corner store, and it was owned by the people who lived in the community. Upstairs. And they lived where? Where did they live?
Upstairs.
They lived upstairs. Great opportunity to put things back into the community. Let people be entrepreneurs. They can have their business in a lower level, and they can live. And that's what they did. They lived above their businesses. But they weren't people who came into the community and decided we're going to set up shop. They were people who lived in their community. Their heart was for their community, and they wanted to see their community thrive. What happened to those people? Oh, now it's starting to get quiet. We were all chiming in, and now it's getting quiet. I need to know, so I want everybody to think about that. What happened to those people? So now we went over housing, transportation, and we have went over the employment barriers, okay? So next slide, please. We now need to get out of the past. The present is not looking so great, but we need actionable strategies to move forward. Not to live in the past, but sometimes some things weren't really broken, and now we're realizing that we were fixing things that may not needed to be, you know what I mean, and has taken us further away from what made us a community in the first place. So the most powerful solutions come from those closest to the problem. And we have let so many outside people come into our communities, but we have not asked ourselves those same very questions or provided those same very answers. Nobody is coming to save anybody. And if there's a quote, anybody will tell you, they'll say all the time, they'll say, what did Dr. Clay say? I say this all the time. Philanthropy and nonprofits are not going to save St. Louis. They can't, and they never will. You can write me a check right now. Spend it. I'm going to do, I'm going to, get some tangibles, pay off a utility, get the sign off my door. And then what? I'm going to be evicted next month. And I'm going to get another nonprofit. Give me a basket. Toiletries. They had their Doves opener last time. And it goes on. And it goes on. And it goes on. Okay? I run a nonprofit. There are some nonprofits, and they're wonderful. And they help people who want a better position. because everybody needs a little help every now and again. Somebody might have lost a job, husband might have lost a job, wife might have lost a job, sick child, sick. But at the end of the day, everybody does not fit into that realm or hoop of help need. And what I mean by that is that for the community that I serve on a regular basis, they have nowhere to put your turkey, okay? They don't have nowhere to put, they don't have anywhere to put your canned goods. All that toilet paper and paper towels that you're giving out, where are you going to put it? But do they not deserve those things? I have the paper towel usage of a very, very rich white woman. Because that's how many paper towels I use a day. Like, I mean, anything, like it's done, I do. You know what I'm saying? And we take those things for granted. But at the same time, what we consider is basic necessities only go so far. Somebody who has a house, has a refrigerator, can utilize those. But what about the people? And then similarly to the tornado victims, they don't have a house now. So they don't have a refrigerator. They don't have anywhere to put your hand-me-downs and all the stuff that you donated. They don't have anywhere to put it. What are we doing to have something put into place for people who don't usually have for a rainy day? There were very few people that were able to move along and just say, well, wow, this is unfortunate. It was devastation. But that all comes from things being put into place and people elevating their community voices. It was amazing to see how many organizations and people come together. But it was also very disenchanting for me, and it was also disenchanting for my team, or should I say my team and I. It was very disenchanting because it didn't change the unhoused population for the people that was already unhoused. If they happen to be breezing by one of your cabanas, you all might have gave them a sandwich for the day too, another water, which we always give them every week, but what check is coming to them? What's going to help them get along? So now we've got double the unhoused population, and then we are pitting our community against each other because there are certain people that are going to be eligible to get something, and I don't know how far it's going to take them, but they're eligible to get something, and we still have a community that is still going to be in the same footing, same position, okay? So elevating community voices is going to come from not big box nonprofits. It's not going to come from that. It's going to come from grassroots organizations, people in the community, the people that look just like you, just like me without the titles, me without being part of a nonprofit, that look just like me, that say, you know what, I'm going to get up today and I'm going to go help. That's what made everything go around. I don't want anybody to get anything twisted about what happened just recently, because all of those big box nonprofits and even smaller nonprofits, they dumped stuff. It was like a central location. But in that central location, I'm going to ask you, some of those people already did not have a car. So where were they going to lug all of that in 90-degree weather to a plummeted home with no electricity? And they were afraid to leave it because they were afraid that the same people who they called neighbor were going to take what they had left. So they rather not have any food, any water, or get any of those toiletries and paper towels that I use so eloquently all the time, because they didn't want to leave what was home because they were invested there. So who is already doing the work? All right. So grassroots organizations are already doing the work. And I keep driving that because I'm trying to get people to understand that when this is what we do, this is what we do as a community. When we get a certain amount of funding, when we get a certain amount of visibility, we lose focus. And all of a sudden, what looks good on TV or what looks good for a picture becomes the picture of help. And then you have people who don't have any help at all. There's tenant organizations that are out there. I can tell you a whole bunch of people that don't realize the tenant landlord laws. Mm-hmm. Mental health advocates, we need them. We can't do without them. I do realize that a lot of the unhoused population, there's a lot of MI that needs to be addressed, but it shouldn't be if you want to. Almost should be required. Mental illness. So it's like if you want to get certain services, we want to make sure that the whole person is taken care of and okay. Because other than that, we're going to be going on a hamster wheel. You know what I mean? You can give them as many services and many benefits as you want, but what's happening, okay? Now, we have transit justice coalitions, and a lot of people don't know about that. And when I'm telling you, when I say a lot of people, I'm saying the majority of the people in the community don't know that there are transit coalitions. There are people who are getting six-figure paychecks to regulate all of these things, and they don't have to because nobody ever calls. Nobody ever sends an email. Nobody ever requests them to do anything. So, I mean, I don't know about you all, but I would just still collect my check. I mean, they'll call eventually, right? When they get the information, when they get the education, when they learn. And why don't they know? Why doesn't the community know? Why doesn't the community that uses those services not know? I want you all to think about that question. Next slide. And final. So, housing and neighborhood strategies, okay? We advocate for affordable housing development, inclusive zoning policies, okay? We're starting to implement displacement measures to prevent gentrification, but I mean, now, I mean, great, okay? But the biggest thing for a strategy is going to be invest in neighborhood revitalization and wealth building initiatives, okay? So with that being said, for housing, community, land trusts, tenant protections, and mixed income development, like we were talking about, back like it was in the old days. People living upstairs, people, you might work down there at the store that's down there if that's your, skill set, okay? For health, mobile clinics. Even after Obamacare, I can tell you a whole bunch of people who have never been to a doctor, okay? Mobile clinics, trauma-informed care. You're not going to get anywhere. They don't trust you. There's no trust. They don't even want your handouts because they don't trust you. So how can you help them? And then they're, sending themselves into an unhealthy mental health frenzy because they don't trust you so much, but they need the help, but they don't trust you, but they need the help. Okay? And employment, inclusive hiring, job training, and small business support. Bring the businesses back to community. And these strategies, they all must be grounded in racial equity. If you notice, I didn't just talk about African Americans. I didn't just talk about Hispanics. I talked about the things that made an entire community. Okay? We have to stop talking about only one group of people. A community is a diverse community. Okay? And the equity and racial equity and community partnership needs to come. Okay? And the last slide for me. You can skip that one. We did the wealth building initiatives. We talked about our advanced health equity. So driving through the transportation solutions that we just talked about a little bit, there is a transportation coalition that can help with expanding reliable transit routes to underserved neighborhoods. It is, okay? I want you all beating down the door, sending emails and everything for anybody that you know that does not have a safe or traditional route or a late route that doesn't get them, get them back home to our communities. Improving accessibility for residents with disabilities. They nixed the caller ride. We need to restore that. That's insane. Okay. We need to invest in safe infrastructures. I mean, I ride the Metro Link, and I do that just for leisure. But have you ever seen some of the infrastructures around the public transit? I mean, it's like, do I want to get hit by a bus or do I want to ride a bus? And people are afraid. They they don't feel that they're safe. The next slide for me. We talked about advancing opportunity for all for employment, workforce, and development. We need to expand workforce programs in high unemployment areas. Hey, there's nothing wrong with having a trade and formal education. Okay? Promote equitable pay and leadership representation. It happens a lot in unions because it's forced, but if we are in positions of power, you're in positions of management and leadership and things like that, be convicted. You know if you're offering somebody lower than someone else. Be convicted. Strengthen worker protections and training opportunities. That is into place, but we need to get people employed. We can't even focus on that without employment. And then support growth of minority-owned businesses. That's all minorities. Okay? Next slide for me. The integrated solutions for equity is we need to align cross-sector efforts for maximum impact. We were talking about this earlier. All of these little bitty nonprofits, everybody need to come together, okay? They've cut out our federal dollars. Even if it's just volunteers, the power is in numbers. Foster partnerships between local government, nonprofits, and businesses. Nobody knows more about the community than the community. I should see all of you all at all of the city meetings that I attend. I mean, at some point. I'm not saying all the time, or but I'm just saying that we're not involved. Also, too, we need to use more data dashboards to track progress. I think it should be public information. I think it should be required monthly to be, depending on what municipality that you live in. And then embed equity into all policy decisions. We need to get away from one side, one race, one everything. It needs to be equity for all. And the next slide, please. We talked about elevating community voices, empower residents to lead neighborhood planning and processes, fund the grassroots organizations. Nobody knows our community more than the people who are in the community. Drive racial equity. Use participatory budgeting to include community priorities. There is money. Don't let them tell you that it's not. There is. But if you don't ask for it, you will not get it. Amplify lived experiences through storytelling and policy making. People looking like you and I going to Jefferson City when there's the opportunity, depending on what policy you're trying to support, makes a difference. Don't think you're not welcome. You're welcome. But if you don't go, you don't show, nothing grows. Find out who your local representatives are and make them your bestie. Next slide for me. The evidence practices that work. Implement proven interventions for urban regions, adopt trauma-informed public services. All of these people that are working in public service who are not trauma-informed, educated, we don't trust you. We're not going to take your services because why? We don't trust you. We don't want anything from you because we don't trust you. And why don't they trust you? That should be a question. Scale up successful local pilot programs. I'm talking about a whole bunch of things, and there could probably things swirling in your mind saying, oh, well, Dr. Clay, that's not going to work. That may not work. Well, try me. Get some people together. Let's try to see if it does work. If it doesn't work, then we keep trying. We don't just stop. We are at a stunt. And then track and report outcomes transparently. Again, I feel like that everything needs to be exposed. What are we hiding? If we're doing what we say we're doing the work. What is there to hide? And then the next slide is the call to action. You all are aware. You know what's wrong. You see a few advocates that are, making a voice and they're making a mark. But we need to continue to organize and implement. All this organizing and meeting for the sake of meetings, it's giving meetings. And that's what it's giving, okay? Not implementation. And then we want to commit to advancing racial equity in all sectors. I am talking about in the community, in government, in healthcare, in human resource, in corporations and manufacturing, in those where people who are utilizing those particular skill sets to seek employment. And then, of course, like I said before you when we first started, I am Dr. Brandy Clay. I am the co-founder of the Carousel Foundation of Greater St. Louis, and we are here to drive transformational change for those who have been forgotten in our communities. And we would love to have you volunteer, love for you to be part of advocacy for things that mean heart for community. And my last slide, Malachi. Probably all the time. And I want to thank you for your partnership. I know that together we can build a stronger, more equitable St. Louis, and that is the contact information for Carousel Foundation of Greater St. Louis. Here's some more literature about us and our team, and that is all of the slides from today's presentation. As my sincere hope that in your midnight reading, your moonlight reading, share it with your honey, share it with anybody, your bestie, anybody that you know about, make a conversation, make that a brunch date. What can we do for community? Let's not talk about a mimosa. Let's talk about what, only way we can get a mimosa is if we both, okay, both, but we can't drink it until we have created one objective to support community, whether that is go to align with a new meeting in Jefferson City, or just give out waters, or find one street. Because that's what we used to do in community. If somebody didn't have something in their household, people were like, well, oh, Miss Jackson, she been sick. Cup of sugar, couple of eggs. You know what I mean? You would be surprised at how people who are a prideful community would say, you know what, you're not going to believe this. My child has been sick. I haven't been going to be able to go to work because they punch a clock. They don't have a salary, And thank you. If you give me some groceries, that's building trust, and that's building community. Thank you.